The Productivity Commission stops work tomorrow. I'm joined by Commission Chair Dr Ganesh Nana. So obviously not a particularly happy time.
No.
What was your sense of the way that decision was made and communicated to you?
Well, firstly, kia ora, and thanks for the opportunity to have the chat. We were not given any heads up beforehand. We were given no opportunity to discuss options or provide our case in any way. We had no signal that they were considering disestablishing. We weren't on any list of any of the political parties for closure in the pre-election, the election campaign itself. I know one party had a list of agencies they were looking at closing or running down. We weren't on any of those lists, so we knew full well that there was probably going to be a change in, I suppose, direction and or emphasis in the type of work we were doing, and we were fully prepared on that and hoping to engage in a conversation about those opportunities. But the first we heard about it was the first everybody else heard about it, literally through a public announcement. And I must say, while at this stage, I don't contest the decision to disestablish. Every government has a right to do that. But the process and manner in which they went about it was, I would say, unbelievably cruel to my staff and incredibly thoughtless.
Have you had any discussions with anyone in government since then?
Since then, since the announcement, we've had nothing outside of a letter of expectations from the Minister of Finance, and that followed about a good 3 weeks after the public announcement. And that letter of expectations essentially told us to prepare the Commission for closing down. Before we received that, we had sent various communications and requests for meetings, primarily on focusing on the process of disestablishment to get an idea of timing and the work involved and what we could do to assist with that. We weren't going to stand in the way of the decision. We wanted to help our staff get redeployed. We got no engagement on that at all. So all we got was that letter of expectations. It was delivered to us on the 18th of December.
So no help within, I guess, the wider public service around deployment of staff from the Productivity Commission?
We had, in the end, very little help. We do acknowledge the help of Treasury, our monitoring agency, who did their best to, and obviously they were the conduit in terms of communicating with ministers' offices, and they did their best once the decision was announced to help us through the close down process and help us through with the lease arrangements and those sorts of things, and ensuring that our website and the material on that, and so that our material will remain in the public domain for future reference. So they've been very helpful on all of those things. But in terms of redeployment of staff, effectively we drew a blank.
I mean, any irony in the fact that really the ACT Party was instrumental in the setting up of the Productivity Commission, but really has been behind it now being scrapped?
Well, I'm not sure. We really don't know who made that decision, and you can call me naive, but clearly and I take the Minister's statements on face value. The decision was made because they needed the money wanted to reassign the money to the Ministry of Regulation. It's disappointing, undoubtedly. There's undoubtedly irony in all of that. The biggest irony I see is that there's claims that we changed direction of the Productivity Commission. We couldn't have, given the legislation never changed. Our fundamental purpose remained the same as in the 2010 legislation that initially set us up. To claim that we were changing the direction is a little bit disingenuous. We had to respond to letters of expectations from the ministers of the day, and that is their right. We believe we fulfilled the obligations of not only the letter of expectations, but also consistent with that initial legislation. The purpose was to advise government of the day on ways to improve productivity in a way that will lift well-being of New Zealanders. That's literally those words in the legislation. They haven't been changed. And if you contest the direction of the organisation. You need to contest the ministers of the day who give us those letters of expectations and indeed give us the topics that we need to inquire into.
I mean, the Minister for Regulation, ACT Party leader David Seymour, seems to believe that the new Ministry of Regulation, by presumably helping slash regulations, is going to help improve productivity. Do you think he's right?
I have problems with that perspective. It's partly a perspective on productivity, which is fairly narrow in my mind. It seems to indicate that productivity resides in business, resides in reducing regulatory costs on business. And it's a very narrow definition of productivity, and it seems to be, I would say, confusing it with profitability. Now, I've got no problems with business profitability, but it'd be nice if that was translated into productivity as well. And dare I say, reducing regulations may go towards productivity, but in most cases, it essentially just shifts the costs of those things. Regulations is internalising the costs that businesses face to ensure that they are captured in the decisions that businesses have to make, and indeed decisions that communities have to make. When you reduce the costs on business, the costs don't go away, they just fall on other people in the community, or dare I say, on future generations. And so regulations have a role to play in any modern economy. The costs need to be captured by all businesses in all communities. Otherwise, the costs will fall on others who don't have the power to resist those costs.
Is there any frustration that in the life of the Productivity Commission, and while you're chair, but beforehand as well, that essentially governments of the day, of whatever stripe, tended to just cherry pick one or two things out of the Commission's report, and in fact, all of the work that the Commission has done over that time, much of it has just been left on the shelf?
It's undoubtedly a frustration, and not only a frustration of mine, but of commissioners, both current and in the past, and of staff. But it's also a little bit of, I suppose, misunderstanding of the Commission's role. I mean, there are those who direct the blame on the Productivity Commission for our productivity problems, and we've been in existence for 13 years. How come productivity hasn't changed? And bluntly, read our legislation, read our purpose, read our mandate. We had no mandate or ability to implement policy. Now, some could argue we probably should have, but I would argue we fulfilled our purpose. It was up to government or ministers of the day, the decision makers, to make sure that the next step happened. And if they didn't agree with our recommendations, they really shouldn't have shelved them. They should have at least come out and open and say, why did they disagree with those recommendations, and engage in that engage in that debate, because that was our purpose, was to put those matters front and centre on the table, rather than shelve us. And my worry again with the absence of the Productivity Commission is the productivity challenge remains, and it's a bit and it sounds counterintuitive, but I worry that productivity will now go back into a silo within an agency or a department, and we won't have that ability to put it out there up the front, looking across all agencies, across the challenges, so that productivity is not just seen as the property of business. It is the property of community, and it's got to be connected with our climate change challenges. It's got to be connected with workforce demographics, different changes that are happening, that are about to happen and continue to happen. It's got to be connected to immigration policy, as we said in our immigration inquiry. All of those things need to be connected to the productivity challenge, rather than just looking at productivity in the silo of, for example, a Ministry for Regulation.
Do you think it's possible a future government might bring the Commission back?
Would
you hope so?
it'd be ideal, but I think, as we pointed out in our one of our closing reports, it needs a little bit extra. We need that accountability mechanism, so we are just not yet another advisory shop. Let's look at it, and the models are out there in terms of the Australian Productivity Commission. Their reports go through a select committee, and government are obliged to not only respond, but respond to the recommendations that they accept and the ones that they don't accept. Whether you go down that track or whether you go down the Climate Change Commission track, which is very much legislated. So it's, yes, we've made a great start, and I suppose that's the frustration. We were only just starting.
Dr. Ganesh Nana, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
To support our award-winning independent journalism, subscribe to nbr.co.nz.